get started. So in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. My name's Nell Thompson and I'm the Secretary of the Australian Institute of Animal Management, and I'll be hosting and co-delivering the webinar for you today. So I've been on the AIM committee since 2013 and I'm also the coordinator of the National Getting to Zero program. The Australian Institute of Animal Management, or as we call it, AIM, is the national peak body representing local government animal management officers. The AIM committee consists of a wide range of professionals engaged in the various aspects of animal management. AIM seeks to support those engaged in the business of animal management and the function itself by providing training and information, opportunities for networking and collaboration, and by encouraging the use of best practice policy and practices. And AIM understands the significant pressures placed on local government and the not-for-profit rescue and rehoming service providers when working in the companion animal management space. We welcome new members and you can join via the website at aim.org.au. So if you have colleagues who aren't members, please encourage them to join the fam. So to our presentation for today, we will be about 50 minutes of presentation and then about 10 minutes or so of question time once that's concluded. And the recording of this webinar will be accessible via our website to all members to watch at any time. We're going to ask that everyone mutes themselves during the presentation. And if you have questions, you can start putting them in the Q&A section and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the session. But if you've got quick questions that relate to your understanding of the content, then press the raise your hand button and we're happy to try and get to them during the presentation itself. And if you've got more questions or we don't get to yours during the question time, then send us a message either on our Facebook page or by email and we'll get to you that way. As always, please excuse any working from home background noises that may filter through. So today is a little bit different as Dr. Diana Raymond and I will be delivering the presentation titled, Are We Measuring What Matters? Diana is an AIM board member as well and holds a PhD in applied canine behaviour and a bachelor in animal science. Her primary research area was canine behaviour and assessments in applied settings like animal pounds and shelters and the welfare of companion animals within the shelter and pound system. She's also worked in a variety of academic and industry settings, including as a TAFE and university educator, as an applied scientist studying companion animal welfare and behaviour and working dog assessments, a dog trainer, a shelter nurse, and most recently leading the behaviour team at the Greyhound Adoption Program in Victoria. Diana is now working to integrate and improve animal welfare and animal management practices in Australia through a variety of roles, including as the shelter supervisor at Second Chance Animal Rescue in Melbourne. Diana also runs her own business, providing practical evidence-based training and consulting on companion animal behaviour, management and welfare to people and organisations in the animal management and welfare field. So my background is in shelter and pound operations and management and animal health, and I've worked in the animal welfare care and veterinary sectors for over 30 years, I've just realised, and I'm passionate about improving outcomes for pets who enter the shelter and pound systems. I strongly believe that the best results occur when animal welfare and animal management are working together towards the same goals. So let's get started. I'm assuming everyone can see the screen, and I'm actually going to just stop my video. Di, if you can just let me know that I'm ready to go. Everyone can see the screen?
All good.
Okay, excellent. That is a good start. Okay, so thank you for being brave enough for attending today's session. I know that the thought of being bombarded by information about data and numbers and statistics isn't really that enticing, particularly as we're looking down the barrel of hopefully a few days off. But I'm also hoping that today isn't going to be as bad as you anticipate. We are all about the practical applications, what you can take away and what you can implement straight away. So while you're listening today, have a think about whether there's a particular issue that you'd like to work on, but maybe you don't know where to start. And at the end of the session, we'll open the floor to you all, and together we could try to come up with some metrics that might help get you started. So what is data collection? Data is just information. It's really just keeping an accurate record of what's happening in your department or in your facility or whatever it might be. And given that we're most likely all concerned with what companion animals and their caretakers are doing in the communities that we're responsible for, let's start talking about them. So what are the important things happening in your community? If I walked into your office and asked you, for example, what your reclaim rate is, how many animals do you intake each year, how long do they stay with you, and what the main reason is that members of the public make contact with you, or whether any of these numbers have been going up and down over the last few years, would you know the answers? Would your team members know the answers? What about if I asked you what the budget was for the department or the facility annually, and how much each animal costs that you cared for each year, or that you came into contact with? So we need to think about anecdotal information versus data. What is more useful? We often operate on our experiences, our memories, and our feelings, but sometimes actual numbers can surprise us.
So, hi guys, it's Di. From my perspective, I think the biggest thing that I want everybody to take away from today is that data collection and data use doesn't need to be scary. All this is information that you can collect, and oftentimes having that information will actually make situations where you need to make a decision so much easier, and will give you a lot more clarity around what you're actually doing. So many times, particularly when I'm interacting with people in a kind of consulting fashion, a situation or a decision that seems really tough, once we get the right information and we can present it well, is actually really clear, and the decision itself is very, very easy to make. So if you take anything away from today, don't think about the numbers, don't think about the stats, just think, how do I actually get good information to help me do my job better?
So why are we even talking about this? Well, the driver for the development of the AIM data resources that I'm hoping you've seen communication come through either e-news or social media about was that we became aware of the difficulty that some departments had in putting together meaningful strategic plans, because it's not really possible to plan strategically without all of the relevant information. And it's also not possible to determine if a plan is working or not without all of the information. And this issue was coming up over and over again in our discussions around particularly domestic cat management.
And on that, one of the key drivers for us that really kind of hammered home this particular problem were the results from the cat management survey that some of you likely participated in not too long ago. So now if we jump to the next slide. So this particular question really highlighted to us some of the trouble that people in the animal management space were having. So pretty universally, everybody identified that free living cats were an issue, regardless of whether you're from kind of a rural or remote area, an urban area, inner city. Everybody could recognise that cat management right now is a big pressure on our animal management system. It's also something that's in the forefront of everybody's minds. And so people could tell us what you're doing, but when it actually came down to saying, hey, guys, how effective do you think your current management strategies are? The results were really mixed. So we had this pattern of yep, everybody's pretty clear on what we're currently doing and everybody knows that this is a problem, but we actually don't know if what we're doing is effective. So if you have a look at the slide at the moment, that list of different strategies is in order of the kind of most commonly used strategies all the way down to the least commonly used. And those numbers on the right-hand side are what percentage of our respondents, so I think there was a couple of hundred from memory. Nell, I don't know if you can remember the number off the top of your head.
Yep, it was a couple of hundred.
those are the percentage of respondents who actually felt that they were doing those things, but they felt that it was a positive and effective thing for them to do. So at best, about a third of the people in the AMO system who responded to us and who were doing all of these different things actually felt that what they were doing was effective. And that's a huge issue, because we want you to, A, come to work and feel like what you're doing is worth doing, but also because you guys are the ones who are in this space and you're making decisions about what to do, you know, from here on out. And so if you don't have clarity about it and you're not really sure on what you're doing, that's a huge issue for you. Now, on top of that, now do you want to click to the next slide? We have this looming issue of public opinion. So we know that our communities are becoming much more mindful about cat welfare. We know that people are becoming much more informed and insistent on us actually having really good outcomes for animals that enter into the animal management system. And what we're starting to see now is some really good data, particularly coming out of the US and some European countries, where they're actually starting to get numbers around that, and communities are starting to make big noise. So we know that, you know, from an AMO's perspective, this is an issue for us. We're not really 100% sure if what we're doing is effective. And we know that very soon, if not already, there's going to be a lot more public pressure to actually make sure what we're doing is effective and it is positive and it is actually supported by the public. So there's a lot of good impetus for us to make sure, A, our information is good, but B, when we are saying that this is what we're doing, we're basing that on good information too, so we can communicate that out to the public and we can communicate it out to, you know, our bosses and our funding bodies and all of those things to make sure that we're doing a good job.
So collecting data is all good and well, but what do we do with it once we actually have it? Well, we need to ensure that it's correct. We need to analyse it, and we need to use it to review our programs and strategies. And we need to not be afraid to constantly question our actions or tweak our programs, update our plans. We want to look at this data and information regularly and assess if there are trends happening, determine if we need to change what we're doing, as it's possible we're going backwards.
Now, when we start talking about analysing and using data, this is usually the part where people start having flashbacks to stats classes in high school, and so they kind of switch off and go, oh, what are you going to do? Are you going to start pulling out formulas with letters in them? The thing about it is that good data collection in an applied environment and good data use in an applied environment, like what you guys are doing, should actually be really simple, and it's not something to be afraid of. You don't need fancy statistics, because what you're looking for is changes in you know, your values based on what you're doing, those numbers that are so big that they're what we call light of day changes. So your before numbers and your after numbers are so different that you can see the light of day straight through the middle. You can drive a Mack truck through it. If you need fancy statistics to actually decide whether or not something is working, the effect of whatever it is that you're doing is probably not worth the resources that you're putting into it. So it doesn't need to be anything fancy. You don't need to have some, you know, fantastic grasp on, you know, the fine intricacies of statistics from year 12 maths. You literally just need to make sure that you're really getting good data. And when it comes to actually looking at that data, there's a few general principles that you can follow that will make it much easier for you to do the job well.
And we might have some goals in mind. These goals might be outlaid in our animal management plan or in the budget, or our community might have thoughts and expectations about what and how things should be happening in the place that they call home. So we want to have this information at our fingertips for them and for our management, for the media, and for ourselves, so that we're not operating in the dark. Maybe we're doing really well in our jobs. We may not even know.
And so, like I said earlier, sometimes situations which seem pretty insurmountable can become surprisingly clear and pretty simple to address once you actually know what the problem is. Once you've got that information and it's clear enough that you can say, yep, this is actually what we're dealing with. It's also much easier to justify a request for funding because we're all working in kind of funding short environments, or time or human resources, when you've got good numbers that you can actually show, and when you're trying to explain something to your community. So a really good example of that is for those of us who have been in the community cat discussion forums, the kind of numbers around cat desexing versus, impoundment and keeping them for, the mandatory 8 days if you're in Victoria. When you just look at the numbers and you put it down and you say, how much is it costing us to impound these cats and to do things with them versus how much it would cost us to just desex them all and register them to people and get them straight back out into community? The answer is actually pretty clear. It can be a lot cheaper to just start desexing things. So bear in mind that sometimes a situation that seems unfixable once you get good data becomes very clear. Next one, Nell.
So when we're talking about data collection methods and resources with local government teams, it quickly became apparent that there were a few barriers to improving this situation for them. And these barriers were like finding software to work in with existing council software, and often a lack of support from IT departments, and potential budgetary issues regarding costs of specific software, so shelter management software. And another hurdle appeared to be a lack of confidence and experience with developing data management systems. So the questions like, should we collect? How should we collect it? How do we use it? How do we ensure that it doesn't just become another burden on already overworked teams? It's really easy to get overwhelmed when thinking about all of this. And probably the biggest stumbling block to getting all of this started is knowing where to begin. So with that all in mind, we worked together to put a set of resources together to get everyone started on this data journey. So we'll have a look at those resources in a bit, and we'll talk about some real world applications where we could use them to get the information that we actually need. Let's have a quick look at some of the key data points that might be important for your department. And really anything can be a key data point. It just really depends on what the questions are that you're asking. And so probably what you're going to find is that you will add to your list as time goes on, because the range of questions that you want to ask will grow. So if we're talking about the population of the animals in our community, we want to record information about the animal. We want the species, we want the gender, and we want to know if it was desexed on entry or on point of contact. We want to know its age. We want to probably pick a point where you say the animal is adult, like say over 6 months, or perhaps what you use for registration age in your state. Specifically, you want to know if babies are coming in or if they're adults, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. We want to know if there's ID on it. Is it a collar, tag, registration, microchip, or something else? We want to know its breed or breed type. We want to know its colour and identifying markings, if it has a name, and an admission, impound, or other kind of system tracking number for internal use, and the date and the time that the animal came into care or into contact with us. Then we want to record the date it left our care and what type of outcome it was. So was it reclaimed versus adopted versus sent to rescue or whatever. And we also want to know the reason for the outcome. So we may know why it wasn't reclaimed. They might have rung up and asked how much it was and said, no, I don't have the money, and just didn't come and get it. If it was sent to rescue, why was that? If it was euthanized, why was that? Was there no space in the facility, and did it have bad skin allergies? Well, that's really two reasons. It's a primary and a secondary, because if we hadn't run out of space, we may have been able to hang on to it for a bit longer and perhaps wait for rescue or something to come and get it. Di?
So when we're thinking about what you want to know, I really don't want everybody to get caught up in thinking, my part of the journey for this animal is the animal management part. So before intake, when it gets transferred off, if you're using a shelter and your animals go to that shelter for their mandatory hold and to be kind of rehomed, Sometimes what happens is our data stops at that point where it gets transferred. We really need to make sure that we keep collecting data even past that point, because sometimes the information that you'd collect post-admission to the facility is actually the information that you need to make decisions about what you do before the animal gets to the facility. If we think about a question like, you want to know more about the population of free living and unowned cats in your area. And you want to have a think about how much it's going to cost you to try all of these different types of management strategies. Do you want to desex them? Do you want to euthanize them? Are you trapping? Are you just thinking, you know what, let's just not do anything for the moment? And to make an informed decision, you really need those numbers or good estimates. One way you can ask that question is you pick up the cat, you scan it. If it's got a microchip, yep, it's owned, cool. We can do something with it. It doesn't have a microchip, we'll just consider it unowned. Those cats then get transferred off to a facility, your data stops, and then you now have two populations of cats, some with chips that you're considering to be owned and a whole bunch who don't have chips and you're saying are unowned. Now, the problem with that is that we know it's not accurate because cat ownership occurs on a spectrum. So you've got, people who have got their cats chipped, registered, they're always indoors, they've got tags on them, they're our ideal responsible pet owners. And then all the way through to people who may vet work a cat and feed it but don't contain it and haven't got identification on it, through to people who are caring for cats in their community that they don't really think are actually theirs, but essentially they're kind of functioning as an owner even though they don't technically own the cat or they don't think they own the cat. And then a bunch of animals who are dependent on people and somewhat socialised but just living in that environment, all the way through to never been socialised with people, is a feral. Now, at the moment, all you're doing is delineating between chipped and unchipped. So you've got all of these cats who you don't actually know what anything's going on with. Now, if we extend our data collection to after admission to the facility, we've got some really good ways to identify which cats, once they've been there for a few days, some nice good behaviour measures that we can use to tell us about how sociable those cats are and whether or not they've been previously socialised with people. We can also start collecting information on their desexing status and any potential previous vet work. Has this cat, did it break its leg some time ago and that's actually been fixed and we can see that this cat has had some type of vet work. And what that does is it allows us to actually break down our population into groups. So we don't just have chipped and non-chipped, but all of a sudden we've got, clearly owned, ones that are socialised and maybe even desexed, but they're not identified or registered, socialised cats who have no clear signs of ownership, and cats who do not appear to be socialised. Now we've got some groups that we can actually start applying different management strategies to, and we can really start thinking about how we might target or tailor our management strategies to each of those groups, because it could be that you're thinking, okay, I want to desex all these cats and just, rehome them all. That then has flow-on effects to your facility. Your length of stay, how many cats can you actually carry? It could be that the quickest thing to do is turn around to your community and say, hey guys, we can desex your cats for $5. Bring it in, we'll desex it, we'll chip it, we'll register it, we'll give it back to you next year, we'll, pay your registration, the world's a good place. And it may be that once you start crunching the numbers, if you wipe out all of those, cared for but unowned cats and you turn them into your owned cat population, the cost that it actually, the money that it actually costs you to manage all the rest of those cats subsequently drives down. You don't have as many animals in your facility. All of a sudden, all of these options open up for how you're going to deal with another population of cats that weren't there previously just because of the sheer number of them. So we really want to try and think about, okay, how can we get as much information as we can? Because, again, a question that doesn't look great or it looks very, very hard to fix might be easy to fix once you've got some more accurate data.
Sorry, I flicked over a bit earlier, but okay, this one's your slide as well, Di.
Oh, cool. Sorry, I went back on mute. So things to keep in mind when we're collecting data are that the currency of our data, the accuracy and the consistency of our data are everything. If you've got a whole bunch of information but it doesn't mean much, you've probably just wasted a lot of time and energy collecting information that doesn't mean much and is not going to help you. So if you're going to commit to doing data collection, really super important that even if you start small and you think, okay, I'm only going to collect data on these 6 points because that's what I've got the scope to do right now, make sure that data is accurate. Some things that we want to avoid, and we want to avoid them because we've seen them happen, listing a litter of kittens as one cat in the system. So this can be a problem for a multitude of reasons. It gives an inaccurate picture of the cost of care because it costs a lot more to care for and vet work a whole litter of cats than it does to vet work one. But it also gives an inaccurate picture of your overall numbers in your system. Not keeping your records up to date. And by that, what we mean is at the end of every day, every animal that is in your facility should be accounted for is in your facility. That data should be there. We want to make sure we're getting a good, complete picture of your workload and an accurate representation of your pet population. And that can't happen if there's chunks missing. Not using consistent terms or not using consistent language. So what one person thinks is an aggressive or an unsocialized cat or dog will vary to what another person thinks that is. So we need to make sure that our information that we're actually collecting is very, very clearly defined and everybody's on the same wavelength. Because if it's inaccurate and everybody's putting different things in, it's unreliable. There's not really much point in having it. Not confirming the information on the animal. So not checking the sex, not rechecking an animal for a chip. Things like that. It could be that you've had the same animal in your care 3 times, but one of those times it actually wasn't scanned properly, or for some reason the chip didn't come up, or somebody didn't record the chip number, and so you're missing that information. It's not accurate, and a potential side effect of that is duplication of animal files. So not an uncommon situation to have multiple files, and each file doesn't have the animal's entire information on it. And that can lead to it can be a huge barrier to reclaim, because it could be that the animal's been into your system before and you've actually got the person's phone number already in your system, but you just don't know it. And it also gives an inaccurate picture of the population of animals, because you've got potentially a whole bunch of animals in your system that look like they're not registered when actually they are. It's just that their files aren't up to date in whatever shelter management system you've got. And not including data about animals who are returned to field or cats who are released from traps. This is a big one. So a decent portion of your workload is actually doing things to keep animals out of shelters, and we need to make sure that that information is also collected, because when somebody says how you're breaking down your day, what's your time budget, it's not just about how many heads are through the door, it's also about all those other things that you're doing in the community. So next one now.
Yep, so just to reiterate, really, if the data input is not complete, accurate and timely, then the resulting output is unreliable and really of no true useful value. So this really is the key to the whole process, and make sure you're not wasting your precious time and resources on weak data. And that's really where the whole team needs to be on board and involved with what's happening. So after collecting the animal data, we want to record information about the person that was attached to the animal, even if they're not the owner themselves, or at the very least, the circumstances where the animal came from. So this might look like the name of the owner or finder, address and phone number. Email is really helpful as well. Where the animal was found, how was it found? Was it trapped? Did it wander into someone's yard? And why was it brought in? Was it roaming, surrendered? Was it seized for some reason? Why is it there? Why has it come to our attention? So what are the kinds of questions that we can answer from the information we've collected? We might be able to identify that there's a lot of kittens coming into our care, or that we're being asked to go and pick up a lot of kittens. This might indicate that there's a larger than, I guess, useful population of entire cats in our community. And if we implemented relevant programs to combat this issue, we should see the number of kittens coming into care go down. We might be able to identify that a large number of dogs that come into contact with us don't have microchips. So we might be able to implement programs to combat this problem. We might see that there are pickups being requested each year from the same group of houses for cats, indicating that there might be people needing support to reduce their numbers, dissect those in care, or there might be a need to bring in another council department into the conversation. We can work out how long it is taking to have our animals reclaimed. Is it super quick, or is it taking a few days for the owners to make contact with us? If so, why might that be? Does the community have the skills and knowledge to find a lost pet? If not, we might be able to help with that. We can work out how much the daily cost of care is for each animal on average. Di touched on this earlier. If we multiply that figure by the length of stay, we can see how much they're costing us. And from there, we might be able to pitch council for a budget increase, or work out that it's actually costing us more to hold the animals than it would be to release them back to the owner. Then there's another level of information that we can collect that's a bit more in depth. If animals are being surrendered to us, let's ask why. If there's a trend in behaviour issues, perhaps there's a community program we could develop, maybe in collaboration with a local trainer or dog club, to work on these issues. Is it that people's animals are getting out and they're having trouble containing them? Could the local men's shed help, or Bunnings, or local hardware? Do we have repeat offenders that don't wear collars? Can we give them a collar and tag next time they're in, so that when they do get out again, they can be returned pretty quickly without being impounded? Are we having a problem with dog attacks? If so, where are they occurring? At the park, outside the front gate of where they live, on lead, off lead? Is the owner present or not? What time of day is it? Are there traits or factors we can identify statistically that are common to these events that are happening? Are there incidents dog to dog to human, or dog to another species? Within each of these categories, are there specific circumstances in which we're seeing the most bites? So dog parks near sports ovals where little AFS runs on weekends, or beside a footpath used by a mum's group. So maybe with more info, we can put together preventative strategies to work on the problem. Maybe we can target our efforts to have more impact. Is there some low-hanging fruit that we can pick that would put out a few of the fires that we deal with on a daily basis? We're now getting a level of information that can help us to plan where to spend our really limited resources. Maybe you need more staffing resources covering a certain area of the municipality, rather than spreading them out across the whole area, or perhaps one end of the day is busier than the other. Targeting your minimal resources to the most needy area of operations may be more effective than what you're currently doing. And with your data collection in place, you're going to know either way. Once we've started to collect data, we really should think about sharing it with the community. The data is the evidence that you have, so it can be a really powerful communication tool. The majority of the community have no idea of the scope of your roles, the kinds of issues that you deal with every day and how often. And if we can put actual numbers to what we're trying to communicate to the community, then the messaging is a lot more real and applicable for them. This image here is an example of a post that Maricopa County Animal Care and Control in Arizona put on their social media on a regular basis. So with this image, they talk about what these numbers mean for the animals in care, what they need from the community to improve the situation. If you don't know who this person is, then you're clearly not as old as me, and that's fine. I'm not going to explain it. But the other thing we need to do is to find out what the other stakeholders in the community are experiencing. So by sharing and collaborating with perhaps neighbouring councils, local shelters, vets, rescue groups, we can get a much broader and perhaps a clearer view of what's happening throughout the community. Additionally, by piecing together all of the information from a variety of councils in a variety of environments with a variety of communities, we can start to ask and answer bigger picture questions. What types of cat management strategies typically work best in city areas, and why? What works best in rural areas? What about suburban areas with and without nature reserves? We could be potentially harbouring a pretty limited or skewed view of the situation. So we have more, if we have more information, we might see the whole picture and not just a slice of it. Di.
Unmute, I think I'm back.
Yeah.
So let's have a look at some data analysis and interpretation tips. So there's a few things to keep in mind when you get to the point that you've got, a decent data set and you want to start having a look at it. First thing is it's important to look at both the raw numbers and the percentages. Sometimes you'll actually need both, and sometimes one is better than the other. So, if you're looking at a trend in your, say, your intake over a period of time, over a couple of years, just your raw numbers might actually work really well for that. But if you're wanting to know about the portion of owned pets who are actually coming into your system, your percentage is going to be a better numeral for that. So really have a think about what it is that you're wanting to know, and if in doubt, just provide both. Using graphs to visualize data is really helpful. It's one of those things where you can stare at a table full of numbers all day and not really sometimes kind of see something that as soon as you put it into a graph, you're like, oh, wow, there you go. That's really super clear. That's that light of day thing. If you put two numbers into a graph and you can see, boom, you can drive a Mack truck straight through the middle of them, you probably don't need stats at that point. Make sure you're comparing apples with apples. If you're looking at something like your intake of kittens, you want to look at your intake from the same rough time period during the year. So autumn intake of kittens from 2020 and 2021. Don't look at your intake of kittens in spring and then in autumn and compare those, because there's a lot of other factors that are actually going into that. And also make sure you've got enough information recorded that you can actually identify what an apple is. This is that thing where you can always bunch information together, but you can't necessarily pull information out if you don't have enough definition or clarity in the numbers. When you're doing comparisons between communities or geography, one of the most common metrics that we look at is number per 1,000 of the human population. So what's your cat intake from this suburb per 1,000 people who live there versus from a different suburb or a different area. But depending on what you're looking at, you might also look at a set area. How many cats do we have in this kind of square kilometre area? Particularly if you're a rural or remote council, the number of people might be less indicative, or it could be another relevant measure like your population density or your mean income. If you're trying to look and see, what potential strategies you could use to help the subsets of your communities where the most animals are coming in from, it might be really useful to look at the mean income from those areas and really start targeting low cost measures in some areas and start using other forms of perhaps marketing in areas where mean income is not necessarily such a barrier to whatever the strategies that you're looking to sell. Don't get too attached to what you think is going on. Don't get attached to that initial hypothesis. They're made to be broken. That's what science is all about, testing them and seeing where all the weak points are and really working out what we don't know. And oftentimes with extra information, you'll be able to make a much better estimate of what's going on. Then you can test that, and over time you get more and more clarity around what you're kind of seeing and what you think is going on. But do remember that correlation does not imply causation. So just because two things are changing at the same time, it does not mean that one is causing the other. So there's studies that show that people who eat yogurt regularly have a healthier body weight than those who don't eat yogurt regularly. So can we say that if you eat yogurt, you will have a healthy body weight? And can we assume that yogurt causes healthy body weight? We all know that that's not true. Or might it be that people who make healthier diet choices also tend to eat more yogurt? And so what we're seeing is that people who make healthy diet choices also tend to eat yogurt. There's two things that just happen to be happening at the same time. What we can say based on those two numbers is that eating yogurt is correlated, so changes in the same way as healthy body weight. We can't say that it causes it. We don't know what the link between the two is. We can just make an educated guess. Now, in most situations, there's actually multiple contributing factors, and so we don't want to oversimplify something and assume that one thing is causing another when it's not necessarily doing that. And also, as you're going through, start kind of thinking about, questions that you could ask yourself. What else could actually be going on here? So it could be that I genuinely think that there's lots of cats who are coming in from an area where, there's a low socioeconomic area, there's lots of people. We think that a whole bunch of people are feeding community cats, there's cats coming in from there. But what else could actually be going on there? What else has changed? So sometimes our data will change. We haven't actually done anything different, or we've done something different, and then our data really hasn't changed very much. What else could have actually changed that could be affecting the numbers that we're looking at? What are the demographics? What's the context of those numbers? And what are all those factors that could be impacting your results? And once you've got that data and that information in front of you, what other questions could you be asking that might actually be really useful for you? So it could be that, you went in to ask one question, but all of a sudden you've got this information and you're like, oh, hang on a second, this is actually really useful for me to solve a completely different problem. Or can I ask another question? And then that helps me lead to a pathway where I can make some good decisions there too. So back to you now.
Okay, so let's talk about the AIM resources then. This is the webpage where you'll find them on the AIM website once you've logged in using your membership. So they're under the resources tab. So you can go and check those out. But we will quickly run through what they actually are. And so there are four different resources. One is a background information, and it's relating specifically to cats, because I guess this is the conversation that all of this came out of, but it can be used for anything. So it's a one-pager with suggestions for what would be useful to collect and suggestions for metrics that might be used to collect useful data around it. Then there's the pre-cat management legislation implementation or amendment data collection document. And really that's to be used alongside the background info document. And that came out of discussions around councils putting in place legislation, local laws. So it might be containment measures, it might be mandatory desexing or something like that. But it really, the considerations for those policy changes probably hadn't gone as deeply as they could have. So this is a good document to guide those discussions and that thought process. And then there's the guide to the use of the spreadsheet itself, which is the how-to. And then there's the sample spreadsheet itself. So Di's actually going to share her screen. I'm going to stop sharing mine. And she's going to bring that spreadsheet up, and we'll run through it together. And then, yeah, feel free to ask any questions that you might have. I think I've unshared now, Di. Yep, great. That looks good.
Cool. So everybody can see?
Yep, I'm getting that.
Awesome. Excellent. So this is the desktop version of the spreadsheet that we have up on the AIM website. We'll go through how it works and a couple of the kind of tools that you can use once you start getting some data to keep an eye on what's going on with the animals in your municipality. It might look a little bit different. So the nifty thing about Excel spreadsheets is that you can literally host them on a Google Sheet. And so you can have people entering that data in real time on the side of the road as long as they have an internet connection. And so sometimes the Google Sheet will look slightly different to this, but the functionality is pretty much the same for anything that we're likely to do with the spreadsheet. So if you open it, it doesn't look like this. It definitely probably won't have the dark background because that's just my screen. Don't freak out. It's all the same stuff is there. You just need to kind of find where the specific buttons are. Now the sheets, the actual file itself has two separate sheets in it. So this master sheet is the sheet where all of the individual data about the dogs and cats or other animals that come in will live. And each row will have a specific animal in it. So if you have a look at this top row here, this is information about one, just an example animal. And you can see that, he was admitted previously with this admission number. There was no complaint associated with it. This was the date he was admitted time. Cat, he was trapped by a community member, and then here's all of the other information about the cat. It was adopted out and its length of stay was 4 days. Now, this second sheet we have here is what we call the drop-down lists. So on each row, if I go across to, say, admission type, if you see when I click on this cell, there's a little drop-down arrow that pops up. And if I click on that I can actually select any of those options for this cell. And so when I'm popping information in here for this animal, I've got some things that are free choice, so I can just type in whatever I like. And then I've got other cells which I actually have to select an option for. I can't type into that cell. It has to be one of that selection. And all of these little drop-down lists live in the next sheet across. And the really nifty thing about that is it means that you can change things on the fly. So we've got admission type, and we had a bit of a brainstorm and thought, okay, what are the different admission types that we can think of? But it could be that in your particular area, you actually have another admission type, or you find that you want to break one of these types down into, a finer detail. And so what you do is actually change it on this list, and then you go back to your data sheet here and go type of admission, highlight that column. And then when we go to data, there's a really nifty function, which is called data validation. And then we can start to change. You can see that we've got a drop-down list, and my source is the location on that other sheet, where I can say these are the ones that I want. Now, don't worry about remembering the specifics for how to do all of this, because the fantastic thing about Excel is it's been around for so long that if you just go to Google and you type in how to do a drop-down list in Excel, it'll pop up and you'll have like a little 5-step, this is how you do it, and it'll step you straight through it. Now, a couple of other things that are on here. If you have a look at our admission date here, you'll see that there's a little note in the top in that title slide which says, please input your date as day, month, year. And then there's also another column, if we go across, which has got our discharge date, and that's got the same format for the date. Now, the reason why that's important is because this sheet will automatically calculate your length of stay. And so all of these zeros are just there because there's no information here. But as soon as you get dates in these, admission and discharge dates, that'll actually pre-populate. It'll populate that itself. And then you can start calculating things like your average length of stay. You can sort by the type of animal, dog, cat, kitten, puppy, goat. And then you can calculate your average length of stay from that. And you can do it really quickly. It's literally just a matter of, again, don't freak out about the specifics of this if you haven't used Excel before, but it's literally you just type in equals the average. You can then highlight the cells that you want, close your brackets and hit enter, and that'll start telling me the average. It could be that you want the sum. How many days in care have we actually provided to dogs in our community? That can be a really way to start to try and communicate with your with the people in your area. This is how much it's costing us to have your animals in the pound, or to keep these animals in care, or to your funding people, this is how much it's costing us to hold on to all of these cats. And so we say, okay, we've provided 3,526 days in care at an average of $20 per day per cat. This is how much money we're actually spending just to keep these cats in the facility. And so that can be really super quick, and you can pull those numbers up straight away. Another handy thing that you can enable on a sheet like this is highlighting of duplicates. So it doesn't sound very swanky, but if you say go to your microchip numbers, instead of having to either hunt through or search if an animal comes in a second time, what you can do is there's what we call conditional formatting. So if you go back to your column, I've highlighted my microchip numbers. I can say, I want to highlight cells according to a rule, and then I'm going to say duplicate values. Fill it with red. If there's a duplicate, fill it with red, and you go, okay, cool. If I then go down here in a week's time, I get a number, an animal come in who has the same microchip. Is that the right number of zeros? Let's see. Yep, cool. It'll automatically pop that up and make it red. We can do the same thing with registration numbers and make it a different colour. And you can just literally pick different colours for each thing. So if I make this one yellow, it could be that the rego number is the same, but for some reason the microchip number is not. It's a really handy way to pick up potential inaccuracies in your data. Somebody's inputted a microchip number wrong. Your rego number is the same, but your numbers are wrong. Or it could be that you think, okay, it might be really handy for us to know if a particular street is problematic, but we can't grab GPS data because our systems just can't do that. So you whack in a column with your street name, make sure everybody's using capitals the way they are, and then you just hit, okay, make duplicates in the street name, bright pink, and then all of a sudden, every single time that street name pops up, it's going to be bright pink, and you can very quickly say, okay, where are my duplicates popping up? And that's a really good way to just draw your attention straight away to potential, things in your data that might be useful for you. The other thing, and again, so your transfer partners, so sorting, if you haven't used sort functions in Excel before, you can just do a good old-fashioned sort. So if you go highlight your sheet and you go, I want to have a look at my data, I've got headers, and I think, oh yeah, I could have animals coming in who are maybe they've been registered a couple of different times. Maybe I've got some duplicate animals in the system. So I sort my registration number and then I sort my microchip. And so we'll literally sort the whole thing. So all of your duplicates will be right next to each other and you can start to have a look at it that way. Or it could be that you want to have a look at, say, your animal type. So if we want to look at species and then we want to sort by age. And then you can literally just sort and that'll start to say, okay, it'll loop all of your cats who are less than 6 months old together in a group. And then you can start playing with that data and only look at that data. You can also filter, which is a different thing again. But sorting is usually the quickest and easiest way. And then if you want to take it back to the way it was, you just go sort by impound date. It'll put everything back the way it was before. Now, if you are already gathering some data either through your council system or if you are sending your animals off to a shelter facility that has something like Shelter Buddy, they can also export. Oftentimes those systems can export information into an Excel sheet as well. So even if you haven't started collecting this information, if you think, actually, I want some of this info, I want to start having a look at our data, you can use Excel for all of that as well. Just get those exported sheets. Things like Shelter Buddy literally just spit out an Excel sheet and you can just open it up and start playing with it. Main thing to remember when you're doing this is that Excel has a limited number of columns. So you've got only so many columns you can go across ways, but you've got an unlimited number of rows. So you can literally just keep going down and you can have years and years and years worth of animals with every single animal impound having its own row, and that will just keep going. If you're using the hosted online, the Google Sheets version, it will eventually get a little bit slow, and then you just export it, save it as an actual Excel sheet on a computer system somewhere, back it up, and then have your smaller version that's available on the road. That's just more your current information. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, this might be a good time to perhaps take some questions, or perhaps if there is someone out there who's got a burning issue that they want to, chat with the group about, and perhaps we can think about some, ways that data might be able to help them, or just general questions. Raise your hand or unmute yourself or pop it in the Q&A, whichever you prefer. You've consumed a huge amount of information that we've thrown at you, and you've done well to hang in there, so we really do appreciate.
We definitely do.
Yeah.
even if you've just got a thought on any of this, do you think it's going to potentially be useful or doable for you, or is there a particular hurdle if you're looking at this and you're thinking, actually, this might not be doable for us for one reason or another? Let us know, because the whole reason we did this was to make it useful for you guys. So if it's not, or if we can change something to make it more useful, then by all means shout out, because it could be that somebody else is thinking exactly the same thing.
Everyone's being very quiet. I think they're probably a bit shocked with the amount of information. Oh, Adele, I think this is great. Thank you, Adele. That's lovely. All right. Well, look, if there aren't any questions, we won't keep you any longer. I know there's a lot to get done before. Hopefully you've got a few days off. I hope you're all having a bit of a break. Lisa, you don't have any questions? Okay, cool. And look, really, in closing, we just want to say that it's never too late to get started, but you can never start early enough. And we're here. If you decide that you would like to go ahead with this and use the resources, then we're here. So if you've got questions or problems or want to discuss it further, then contact us here at AIM. And, you know, we're an industry group. We're here for you guys, for the members. So excellent. Sam says, you've given me food for thought. So great. Thanks, Pat.
Yay.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for being here. All right, we'll let you guys go. Have a fantastic Easter. Take care of yourselves. Thanks, Di, for co-presenting.
All good.
And yeah, keep an eye out on the AIM e-news and social media for the next webinar once we announce it, and we hope to see you there. So thanks very much, everybody. Talk to you soon. Yeah, happy Easter.
Happy Easter, guys. Bye.